President-elect Donald Trump has rounded out his cabinet picks and selections for several other top spots in the administration. The transition will now focus on getting those choices confirmed. NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson has the latest.
The Trump team beginning to turn to a new phase in the transition, possible confirmation fights for the president-elect's top picks, including his choices for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, both expected to face tough questions. Gabbard accused of amplifying Russian propaganda.
Well, I think she's compromised. Russian-controlled media called her a Russian asset.
I think it's really interesting that anybody that has a different political view now is being cast as a Russian asset. I think it's insulting. It's a slur, quite frankly.
She's also facing questions over her secret meeting with the Syrian president in 2017.
She met with Bashar Assad. We'll want to know what the purpose was.
Gabbard has rejected accusations she is a mouthpiece for the Syrian regime. Defense Secretary pick Pete Hegseth expected to be questioned over a California police report detailing a woman's sexual assault allegation, which he denies.
The matter was fully investigated, and I was completely cleared.
Officials have not said why Hegseth was not charged, but he paid his accuser a settlement in 2023. Hegseth also in the spotlight for comments that women should not serve in combat roles.
We would have an ineffective military that was not capable of deployment if we were to pull out all the women and say you cannot be in combat.
The policy is set by the President of the United States, not by the cabinet members. I think Pete Hegseth will follow the lead of the Commander-in-Chief.
These latest revelations prompting questions about vetting for Mr. Trump's cabinet picks and apparently skipping the traditional FBI background checks.
Why wouldn't we get these background checks for the most important job in the United States government?
I don't think the American public cares who does the background checks. What the American public cares about is to see the mandate that they voted in delivered upon.
Well, actually, I would rather the FBI investigate people that have the most important positions in the world than Barney Fife. And I think most of Americans are with me. Why in the world would you not want the FBI to look into the background of people who are in the military chain of command and will have a say in whether the United States launches nuclear weapons or not? I can tell you, Bob Gates tells the story time and again about the night that Dr. Brzezinski got the message that the Soviet Union had launched incoming nuclear missiles towards the United States. And he said that he sat downstairs while his children, including Mika and his wife, were upstairs because he knew they would all be dead in 15 minutes. But they called around, they made the right choices, they realized that actually it was a false alarm, and the country and the world was saved because you had people like Dr. Brzezinski, because you had people like General Odom, because you had people like Bob Gates that were making those decisions. Might be good to make sure that the person that's in the line of that chain has a background and has the experience to make the tough life or death decisions that will impact the world. Let's bring in right now Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and presidential historian Doris Kearns-Goodwin, and NBC News National Security Editor David Rode. His latest reporting for NBC News is on the AG pick Pam Bondi and her past vow to prosecute the bad prosecutors who indicted Trump. That sounds kind of like a former prosecutor from Connecticut. What was his name? Who was the guy that launched the attacks and made a fool of himself?
Durham?
Durham.
Yes.
Durham. Investigate the investigators.
The beard is
the beard.
Yeah,
it didn't go well for him,
No.
and he ended up. He had a great reputation. He ended up making a fool of himself. So I don't know that they want to actually repeat that. Doris, so I want to go to you. I'm sure. Not only because you're a presidential historian, but because you're so much smarter than me. I'm sure you have much more instances like I just expressed about, Dr. Brzezinski. When Dr. Brzezinski was called, said nuclear missiles are coming in from Russia. What do we do? And they called around, made the right choice. I know there were other examples, too, I think, in the 80s where they mistook shadows on clouds, I think it may have been, for another nuclear attack. Talk about how important it is to have the right people around the president or for life or death decisions that could impact the entire planet.
Well, you know, one of the things that Reagan said when he was choosing his cabinet is that he had three criteria. One was loyalty to the conservative ideology, the second was competence, and the third was integrity. And I think that's what we've got to look for. Competence is huge given the size of these departments. But you know, the other thing, Joe, that I'm just thinking about when we're talking about those questions that Bondi had put forward, the possibility of investigating the investigators and prosecuting the prosecutors, two presidents would tell this is a bad thing to do, to have retribution. I mean, Lincoln would say everybody was going for him. The radicals were saying, hang the Confederate officers, hang the Confederate generals. He said, we've had too much hate. This is when the Union was about to win the war. Too much hate. I just want to go forward. And then, of course, he said, with malice toward none and charity for all, let us bind up the nation's wounds. And then you have Adams, who in his administration really went after his opponents, the journalists who were malicious against him. That 1798 Alien and Sedition Act that Mr. Trump has referenced was used to put them in jail. It did not turn out well for Adams. In fact, the public hated it, and he lost the election in large part because of it. They didn't want to see them rounded up. And then Jefferson comes in and greatly heals everything by starting the whole administration with Adams was a Federalist. He was a Republican. He said, we are all Federalists. We are all Republicans. And he was saying, in a certain sense, let's look for comedy. Let's look for civility. Let's look for magnanimity. If retribution becomes an aim of this administration, it will go badly. So these Republicans would tell the new administration.
So, Peter Baker, we're going to talk about some of the cabinet picks that we're going to get to David on the AG pick in a minute. But first, Jonathan Lemire and I have been talking this morning about how there's been this focus on Tulsi Gabbard. It seems to have been shifted for Republicans over the past 3, 4, 5 days to the DOD selection, Pete Hegseth, and a growing understanding of just how powerful that position is, how important that position is, and how dangerous it would be to have somebody that does not have experience in managing anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Trump approach here is basically the swarm approach to cabinet selection. You throw out so many different people, many of whom are controversial or would be controversial or would be problems with confirmation, that you're likely to get the vast majority of them through because in the end, the Senate will be able to pick off 1, 2, maybe 3 at most, and then the rest kind of manage to get in. People like, John Ratcliffe used to be considered to be too controversial. In the first Trump term, the Senate Republicans said, no, let's not have him be in charge of intelligence. He's too partisan. Then Trump said, fine, you don't want him. We'll put Richard Grenell in there as an acting DNI. And the Senate then said, hey, let's go ahead and confirm Ratcliffe after all. This time he's being put up for CIA. Nobody has any problem with that. He's considered one of the adults in the room. Instead, you're right. They're going to have to decide. Are they going to take on Pete Hegseth? Are they going to take on RFK Jr.? Are they going to take on Tulsi Gabbard? Because they can't take on all of the ones who might be problematic in one fashion or another. And there's plenty of others than just those three. But I think you're right. Hegseth is the one right now that people seem to be focusing on. He would be in charge of a 2 million member armed forces, the most powerful military in the history of the world. And by the way, even what he admits to doing, even though he denies that he assaulted this woman, he admits to having a consensual affair with her, which was outside of marriage, an adulterous affair. That under the Uniform Code of Military Justice would get you, in a lot of heat if you were one of the generals or officers who's going to be reporting to Secretary Pete Hegseth.
And so, what people that support him will say is he was in the military. He did lead in the military. And I will tell you, even his strongest detractors will say he had a good war record. First part of the war record, he became disillusioned, started saying some deeply troubling things to a lot of people who even served with him. But again, you've got 2 million, and with civilians, I think maybe even up to 3 million people that you're managing. And for no experience, administrative experience in peacetime, managing anything of a significant size, I mean, the Pentagon will just eat up anybody that goes over there and doesn't understand how it works.
Yeah, I mean, he served in the military. Even his detractors, of course, thank him for his service. But he came on Trump's radar screen for two reasons. One, he advocated for some of his fellow soldiers who were accused of war crimes. And then secondly, he was on Fox News. There have now been, of the Trump cabinet selections, 9 of them, 9 have been either former Fox News hosts or contributors. And Hegseth is the one who right now is getting a lot of attention for 2 reasons. One, you just mentioned the idea that he simply has no experience managing anything remotely the size of the Pentagon, but also that he was not forthright with the Trump transition team about some of the details of the sexual assault allegations dating back from California in 2017.
Well, and by the way, that's their concern. He wasn't straightforward with that. He wasn't straightforward about a police report. He wasn't straightforward, I think, when it was. There are several things that the Trump transition team is now saying is causing them deep concern. What else is out there?
Right. They were caught by surprise or wondering if there's more to come. And this also just reiterates the shortcoming of their own vetting and background check system because they're not using the FBI. They're relying on private investigators.